You have likely stared at an old photograph of a drafty Victorian home or a Depression-era cottage, and wondered about the sheer inefficiency of it all. We are obsessed with insulation, triple-glazing, and sealing our homes as tight as a drum to save every penny on heating. Yet our grandparents and great-grandparents often did the exact opposite. They lived in eras where coal was heavy to haul and expensive to buy, or where wood required calories to chop and stack, yet they deliberately opened their windows in the dead of winter. It seems counterintuitive, perhaps even foolish, to the modern mind trained on energy efficiency ratings. However, before you dismiss this behaviour as a lack of understanding, you must realise they were operating on survival principles that we have largely forgotten. If you appreciate rediscovering lost knowledge, make sure you subscribe to Atten Recounts right now, because we are going to dismantle the modern myth of the sealed home. This practice was not about wasting heat. It was a sophisticated, intuitive understanding of thermodynamics and respiratory health that kept them alive in conditions that would likely hospitalize the average modern person. The first and most critical reason for this winter ventilation was the simple, deadly chemistry of combustion. Unlike your sealed central heating system, which draws air from outside or cycles water in a closed loop, our ancestors heated their homes with open fires, coal stoves, and eventually unvented gas heaters. These heat sources are voracious consumers of oxygen and prolific producers of carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and particulate matter. Without a cracked window or a dedicated vent, a room with a lit fire quickly becomes a hypoxic chamber. The draft that we complain about today was actually the engine that drove the fire. A fire needs a constant supply of fresh air to push the smoke up the chimney, rather than spilling it back into the room. When you tighten a room with an open fire too much, the negative pressure pulls the toxic smoke back down into the living space, a phenomenon known as backdrafting. Our ancestors ventilated not because they liked the cold, but because they preferred not to die of asphyxiation in their sleep. Beyond the immediate threat of fumes, there was the relentless battle against moisture, which is the silent destroyer of both homes and health. Humans generate a massive amount of moisture simply by breathing, cooking and washing, and in a home without mechanical extraction fans, that water vapour has nowhere to go. This matters to the survivalist and the historian because of the specific physics of heat capacity. Moist air is significantly harder and more energy-intensive to heat than dry air, because water has a high specific heat capacity. When our grandparents opened the windows for a flush of air in the morning, they were exchanging warm, stale, moisture-laden air for cold, dry air. While the temperature dropped momentarily, the dry air they let in was much faster to heat up once the windows were closed. They were not wasting heat, they were purging the moisture that acted as a thermal buffer. Trying to heat a damp room is like trying to boil a kettle while constantly topping it up with cold water. By drying the air out, they made their fuel go further in the long run. Now we must also look at the medical reality of the early to mid-20th century to understand really why fresh air was treated almost like a prescription drug. Before the advent of antibiotics, respiratory diseases like tuberculosis, known back then as consumption, were honestly the leading killers of the working-age population. The medical consensus of the time, which, still holds weight today, was that stagnant, humid air was basically a breeding ground for bacteria and mould. The miasma theory had faded, but the correlation between stuffy rooms and death was, undeniable. Doctors actively encouraged sleeping with windows open, even in freezing temperatures, because the fresh airflow reduced the viral load in the room and prevented the build-up of mould on the damp, cold walls of uninsulated houses. If you kept a house sealed up in 1920, the condensation would run down the walls, soak into the plaster and timber, and create a black mould infestation that would destroy the structural integrity of the house and, frankly, the lungs of its inhabitants. Ventilation was a crude but effective method of humidity control that preserved both the building materials and the occupants. You can apply this historical wisdom to your modern life today to improve your own heating efficiency and air quality, regardless of your heating source. The technique is often called shock ventilation or blitz airing. Instead of leaving a window cracked all day, which slowly leaches heat into the atmosphere and cools down the physical structure of your walls, you should open multiple windows wide for 5 to 10 minutes in the morning and evening. This rapid exchange replaces the entire volume of wet, stale air with dry, fresh air without giving the furniture and walls enough time to lose their stored heat. Once you close the windows, your heating system will bring the room back up to temperature much faster, because it is heating dry air rather than water vapour. If you are in a survival situation using a wood burner or propane heater, this becomes critical. You must crack a window to feed the flame oxygen and purge the moisture, or you will find yourself cold and damp regardless of how much fuel you burn. The practices of the past were rarely arbitrary. They were forged in the fires of necessity and honed by the harsh realities of physics and biology. Our grandparents ventilated their homes to feed their fires, starve the mould, and lighten the load on their fuel reserves by heating dry air rather than wet soup. By understanding the why behind their actions, we reclaim a piece of survival intelligence that serves us just as well today. If you found this deep dive into historical survival tactics valuable, ensure you're subscribed to Atten Recounts and share this guide with a friend who appreciates the practical side of history.